to ASEAN People Speak, Season 2. I am Regine Jessica Abuel, your host for this podcast. For today's episode, we will be joined by one of the co-chairs of the working group for the ASEAN Human Rights Mechanism, who will share with us her experience in drafting the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, or AHRD, and its impact on the region today. She is the former faculty member at the Institute of Human Rights and Peace Studies at Mahidol University in Thailand. In October 2009, she was the Thai representative to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, or AHRD, a role which she served until December 2012. In addition to her academic duties, she is currently the co-chair of the Working Group for an ASEAN Human Rights Mechanism, advocating for effective regional human rights systems in the ASEAN region. She holds a Ph.D. in international politics from the University of Paris 10. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our esteemed guest for this afternoon's podcast, Dr. Sriprapha Petcharamesree. Good afternoon, Dr. Sriprapha. Nice to have you with us this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me with you.
Thank you also for joining us, and it's our honor to have you as one of our guests for ASEAN People Speak Season 2. How is everything going there, Dr. Sriprapha, in Thailand?
Everything seems to be going as usual in the sense that, we are still having the same Prime Minister, a general. However, when it comes to COVID-19, the situation is getting better. It's more open. Wearing mask is no longer mandatory. But of course, we are recommended to be still as careful as possible, which I think is good.
Yes.
And, of course, Thailand has been affected by the typhoon Noru. I think that what the Philippines was suffering as well.
Indeed. Actually, the typhoon hit the Philippines just this week as well. So both our countries were affected. So I hope everything is going well there in everyone's efforts to recover from the typhoon. Anyway, Dr. Sriprapha, let's get on with our podcast for this afternoon. First, I'd like to ask you, since we're going to talk about the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, or the AHRD, and we understand that you were a part of it, especially in its creation. May we know what were the intentions, the hopes, and maybe the vision behind the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration during its drafting?
Thank you, Regine, for that very important question. I have to start by saying that I was part of the drafting and negotiation process when it comes to the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. In fact, the process includes, two different periods. One was the drafting period, which was, drafted by the drafting team. So you got a separate team, and myself as a Thai representative to the AHRD by the time, we were part of what we call negotiation teams. It means that, we were negotiating on the contents of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration itself. So that's the first thing that I would like to mention. The second one, the drafting or adoption of an ASEAN Human Rights Declaration was actually included in the terms of reference of AHRD. So if you look at the terms of reference of AHRD 4.2, it said very clearly, and I quote a bit here, to develop an ASEAN Human Rights Declaration with a view to establishing a framework for human rights cooperation through various ASEAN conventions and other instruments dealing with human rights. Why this particular particular article is important
Mhm.
because for me, interpreting from this particular article, this particular paragraph, I see a few things. The first one, of course, is for the Aisha to start with the drafting of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. As we know, a declaration doesn't have a legal binding power.
Yeah.
It's a non-legal binding document. But in the same time, if, as I said, if you look at the paragraph, it said, with a view to establishing a framework for human rights cooperation through various ASEAN conventions
Mhm.
and other instruments. So my interpretation is that the vision of ASEAN, at least as it was reflected in this particular paragraph, says that ASEAN is envisioning a legally binding document. And I think
Mm.
this is one of the reasons why the Working Group for an ASEAN Human Rights Mechanism has been trying to push ASEAN governments to actually transforming the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration into a legally binding document. We
Mm.
have been, for example, discussing of having the ASEAN Human Rights Convention, uh, which is uh, which is the general trend, with other regional human rights systems. So that's the second thing. The third thing that I think is also important, as I already read, it said, various ASEAN conventions and other instruments dealing with human rights. If we look at international level, the UN started with the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and then, from there, other international human rights instruments were developed. So we are really hoping, and of course, I think this is the vision of the working group itself. We are really hoping
Mm.
that in the near future, that we'll be seeing other sub-regional or regional human rights instruments, within ASEAN. So I guess for me, that's the way I interpret this particular paragraph in the terms of reference of Aisha.
All right. So thank you for pointing that out, Dr. Sriprapha. The difference between a declaration and the vision of having a convention that legally binds the member states. In connection with that, then, you've mentioned a while ago that a declaration doesn't necessarily have a binding effect in terms of having member states having an obligation to follow what is written there, but they are going to be guided by the declaration agreed upon. Can you mention to us also if were there primary challenges when you were still making this declaration, and how did this affect the drafting process and the output eventually?
Um, uh, I just want to pick up, one thing that you just mentioned about
Mm-hmm.
the very nature of the document itself, because it's a declaration. And I mentioned earlier about the UN, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights,
Mm-hmm.
which was further developed into legally binding instruments at the international level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for within ASEAN, we know that having a regional or sub-regional human rights system is a hard-earned, you know, is a
Yes,
hard-earned,
indeed.
mission.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just because we have to work within, the different political system
Mm-hmm.
within ASEAN, and working, within what we call the ASEAN way as well. So there are, of course, definitely there were many challenges uh, during the process of negotiations. So I was not part of the drafting process, but I was, as I mentioned, I was part of negotiation process. Um, there were, if I can put it in different ways, there were some challenges that I found quite important,
Mm-hmm.
and these challenges have affected the negotiation process and the output itself. The output
Mm-hmm.
is, of course, the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, which I put it here,
Yeah.
and I'll be picking out few of the examples to show you, what were the challenges during the negotiation process. The first one is, of course, the different understanding and perceptions about human rights among the Aisha representatives. Don't forget that we were working with 10 representatives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have to mention as well that I was the only academic, and then
Mm-hmm.
during my batch, there was one colleague who came from NGO background from Indonesia. The rest of the representatives were either active government officials or former diplomats or someone quite close to the government. So with different backgrounds, the different backgrounds of representatives made the process challenging already. And of course, as I said, different perceptions, different understanding of human rights. The second challenge that I found was that the representatives, a majority of them were, in my opinion, were representing the position of their respective government.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course, during the negotiation process, we faced the situation in which some representatives, after we have already agreed upon on some particular articles, then in the next meeting, some representatives will be coming back by saying that, oh look, my government didn't agree with this,
Oh.
could we change? So the process of negotiation restart,
Mm-hmm.
more or less on the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it delayed a bit of process there, but because the Cambodian representative, with the very clear instruction from his prime minister in 2012. I have to mention that in 2012 Cambodia was sharing ASEAN. So the Cambodian
Mm-hmm.
representative got very clear instruction that his prime minister wanted the adoption, wanted the declaration to be adopted, under their chairpersonship. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it helped in accelerating the process a bit, but then in the same time, it also prevents the process of consultations, especially with the civil society groups. And this is the third challenge because Indonesian representative and myself, we were pushing for engagement with civil society throughout the process of the drafting and negotiations, but there was resistance, from some representative.
Mm-hmm.
So only in the last few months of the negotiation process that we were able to organize, regional consultations with civil society groups, but very limited civil society groups, because the groups will have to get the kind of endorsement, from different representatives. So that's the third or the fourth challenge, and the fifth challenge, which I think are quite important as well, is that when we brought up um, some rights to be included, in the declaration in the draft. Some representatives would be saying that doesn't that does not comply with, for example, their religious cultural belief,
Mm-hmm.
or some rights may not be accepted because they do not have that particular vocabularies. And I give you a few examples here. The first one is our push. When I said our push, myself and my um, um, colleague Indonesian representative, we were pushing for the inclusion of right not to be enforced to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, enforced right not to be enforced to disappear, which is about enforced disappearances to be included. Freedom from enforced disappearances to be included in the declaration. Then some representatives say that this freedom from enforced disappearances um, was not in their national law, for example, or there was no case of enforced disappearance in their own country. So they
Mm-hmm.
didn't see any need to include this particular right into the declaration. First example. The second example, the inclusion of sexual diversity,
Mm-hmm.
which which of course is getting more and more important around the globe, including in our region. But of course, it was rejected by a number of representatives as well, due to their religious tradition, religious beliefs. The third one, which I found very challenging here, is about you know um, the the insistence by some representatives on the so-called particularities, which we thought cultural, political, social particularities in the region, which we thought, at least I thought, that the debate was already disappearing or has already disappeared, but it's not the case because the debates over universality and particularities were still there during the drafting process. And then the last example, which I think would be linked to maybe your next question as well. Um, it's about at some point um, some rights were included but were removed at the last minute, just
Mm-hmm.
before the adoption of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration by the leaders. And I can elaborate this more.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think you've gave us a very comprehensive view of the challenges that you encountered when you were drafting the AHRD. And thank you, Dr. Sriprapha, for walking us through the different things that you had to overcome as drafters. You mentioned a while ago that the one of the challenges was that there was a different understanding among the representatives themselves, because they all each person or each representative came from a different perception. Some like you came from the academe. The representative from Indonesia came from the civil society group or organizations, and others are actually state agents or people who are actually working in their respective governments. You also mentioned about representatives, um, some representing the position of their government firmly. And you mentioned a while ago Cambodia, in 2012 when it was chairing the ASEAN. It was the mandate, or at least there was an order coming from the prime minister that they wanted the declaration to be adopted, and that paved the way to accelerate the process for the creation of the AHRD. Now, I'd like to move to the next question then. can you give us background or share your experience with us with regard to the nature of politics behind the drafting of the AHRD? You've mentioned to us the challenges, but maybe you could elaborate on some of them as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think your third question is somehow linked to the second one, because finally, if we look at the challenges, quite quite a number of them are political in nature, if I may put it that way. And I think one very good example or the politics of negotiations or during the negotiation process of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration is the case of, as I mentioned, the case of the fact that some rights were already included and agreed upon by all representatives, of AHR. And very good example is right to freedom of association. So if you look at the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, you will see that this right is not there. As I mentioned, it was removed, at the last minute, just before the night before the adoption. The ASEAN Human Rights Declaration was adopted on 18th November 2012. All right. And as AHR representatives, we were there, in Cambodia, as witness of the adoption, by the leaders of ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. And then, one government, as I said, the right to freedom of association was already agreed upon among representatives, 10 representatives. I mentioned a while ago that we were trying to push for the inclusion of some other rights as well, but we were not very successful. Any document, intergovernmental document like AHRD, is a kind of result of a compromise, and this is the very nature of international relations. If you look at UDHR, for example, that was a compromise at the UN level, so it's exactly the same as at ASEAN level. So at least we got right to freedom of association, which we thought very, very, very important, for the people, especially in a democratic society. So we thought it was fine. As I said, it's negotiation is a process of compromise. We never get the maximum that we wanted anyway. So it was agreed upon, right to freedom of association was agreed upon by all AHR representatives, but then one government didn't want it this right to be included in the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. So what happened was that negotiations were actually going on among the foreign ministers of ASEAN again, which was not supposed to be the case. And finally, the decision was to remove, the right to freedom of association from the declaration. So if you look at the declaration, this right is not there, as I already mentioned. At the same time, the exchange for that removal was actually for the leaders to come up with what is called Phnom Penh Declaration, on the ASEAN Declaration on Human Rights. So you have an additional, which has to be read, which have to be read together with the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. So you see here, for me, as someone studying international politics, this is exactly what we call, politics of human rights. and we see it
Mm.
very clearly during the process of negotiations and adoption of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration.
All right. Thank you for sharing with us that insight, Dr. Sriprapha. Actually, what I would like to pick up also from what you said, that negotiation is a process of compromise. And you mentioned a while ago that when you're in the negotiation table, of course, you would like to reach, or you have a vision of what you want to achieve. But at the end of the day, since there are different member states, different perspectives on things, then more or less the declaration is a product of a compromise among the member states and everyone involved in the drafting. So thank you also for sharing with us the right how the right to association was actually at first agreed upon but eventually taken out because of the nature of politics behind the drafting. We have learned significant insights from what you said, and we thank you for giving us concrete examples so that we could actually relate to it as well. um, Moving on with our last and final question, Dr. Sripapa, considering the things that have been happening in ASEAN, in the region, and from the time that the AHRD was adopted by the member states, do you think the AHRD has been effectively implemented in the ASEAN region then? What are your thoughts on this and why?
Thank you, Regine. Before I answer to this question, I would like to mention one thing about the concept of compromise, because it's it's important, and we cannot avoid in international negotiations, and that's what I was trying to mention earlier. But in the same time, I think we have to be mindful, we have to be careful that the compromise does not translate into what I call a common lowest denominator. Because when you reach common
Yes.
lowest denominator, you may not get anything useful for the people, and that is extremely crucial, at least for me. So we have to be mindful. To address the question about effectiveness or effective implementation of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration in the region, as I mentioned earlier, that the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration was adopted on 18th November 2012. So in fact, this year we are in 2022. So it's the 10th anniversary of the
Yes.
adoption of ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. So if you ask yourself, Regine, how much you yourself use the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration as the reference for the promotion and protection of human rights, because a human rights framework will be useful only when it has been used as a reference for the promotion and protection of rights. So, based on this particular point, then I have been asking myself, how many ASEAN leaders, this is an example, how many ASEAN leaders have made reference to the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration so far, after almost 10 years of adoption? And I have not seen that many occasions. I think the most obvious one was in 2017, when there was violence against Rohingya, the ethnic religious groups, in one of our neighboring countries, which actually pushed them to flee the country, hundred thousands of them, as we all know. And I recall that the the then Prime Minister of Malaysia, Prime Minister Najib, was, I think, maybe the only or first leader having made reference to the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration in his statement and call ASEAN member states to do something in order to protect the rights of Rohingya. And that was the first very clear reference to the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. The another thing which I think is also important to mention is actually about the awareness, because in order for any particular document, including human rights document, to be effective, then you need to see a high level of awareness among ASEAN people. So I have been asking myself, how many people in ASEAN knows about the existence of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration? I'm afraid a very small group of people, very small number of people know about the existence of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. In order to raise awareness, you really have to mainstream the document itself. Last week I was invited to teach to share my experience to discuss about the ASEAN Human Rights system, and the audience was undergrad students. Quite a large number of undergrad students were listening to us. I said to us because it was a panel. I was part of the panel. You just imagine, they have not all of them heard about ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. And as I said, Regime, you yourself, you can ask yourself how many times you made reference to the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. I have been, I remember that, I was trying to raise awareness among the ASEAN people, among civil society about ASEAN Human Rights Declaration when I was still Thai representative to ASEAN. And of course, I always include this into my teachings, to my students. So, of course, my students are quite well aware of the documents. Criticism they would be able to analyze, but making it as a reference, I'm not quite sure if that is the case. The third point that I would like to make about effectiveness of the document of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, whether or not it has been properly implemented or effectively implemented. When the document was adopted in 2012, as far as I recall, 59 human rights NGOs, regional, international, and national human rights NGOs, in the region and beyond, came up with a very strong statement rejecting the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, because they said ASEAN Human Rights Declaration carries with it a lot of defects. It didn't up to international standard. That was the criticism, against the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. As one of negotiator, I would say that some of rights included in the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration are actually up to international standard. Why we have to admit that some are not. In any case, any document is not and will not be a perfect document, because this is incremental process. And as I mentioned a while ago at the very beginning, that we are hoping that in the future this declaration would be further developed into a convention, and we are hoping that it will be better drafted when it comes to legally binding document. Will be better negotiated throughout the process. So with all these shortcomings, I put it as shortcomings in of the implementation. I'm afraid that so far, in my opinion, I might be completely wrong. In my opinion, in my observations, I'm afraid that ASEAN Human Rights Declaration has not been effectively implemented for the reasons that I mentioned. Um,
Mm.
then I want to conclude here about the effectiveness of the implementation of ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. That is, I want to go back to my first point about, usually a human rights instrument can be effective
Mhm.
only, only because everybody wants to use it.
Mm.
If no one wants to use it, no document would be effective anyway.
Mm. Wow, that's quite an insight, Dr. Sripapa. But thank you for that. We appreciate that you've shared with us that, in your opinion, the AHRD has not been effectively implemented because not a lot of people know it, and at the same time has made reference to it. But as you've mentioned a while ago, still, um, it's still a work in progress, and I think we could bank on that as well. That the AHRD, the way that it was drafted up to the time that it was adopted, um, had incremental processes and even progress on the part of ASEAN member states. And I guess it is my hope, and I hope yours as well, that this declaration will eventually pave the way for the ASEAN member states to not just promote but strive for a legally binding instrument among the states, so that it will be more effective, and more people will be aware of it and could make reference to it, because it is the vision of the HRD to have something that the member states could hold on to and reference to eventually, not just by a few people but everyone as part of ASEAN. So, on
Regine, I
yes.
just want. I think you are going to close now.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to pick up what you mentioned earlier because I think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about, the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration as something working in progress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just want to say that yes, it's true. Everything in ASEAN is working in progress.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, as part of society, as ASEAN people, as
Mm-hmm.
part of ASEAN peoples, I want to see, progress in working within ASEAN as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you for that, Dr. Sripapa. And I think that's what we also want to highlight also at the end of this episode. Well, we want to thank you, Dr. Sripapa, for your insights and your sharings throughout this whole episode of ASEAN People Speak. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for listening to me and to Dr. Sripapa, and for joining us today, to our dear listeners. At this point, maybe I would like to invite Dr. Sripapa to promote. Do you have any social media accounts, websites, organizations, publications, or any upcoming projects, Dr. Sripapa, that you would like our listeners to know?
Thank you, Richie. I I do not use social media that much.
Okay.
I don't have Facebook. I don't have Instagram.
Mhm.
And so usually, I could be reached via email, which is
Mhm.
for me the best communication channel.
Mhm.
Um, but then, I have been, of course, as you all know, that I have been working in the human rights areas, human rights issues during the past, I don't know how many years, um, at least 30 years by now. Um,
Mm. Wow.
I would not use the term I, but I would be using the term we, in the sense that I have been helping a human rights NGO registered in Thailand, Pro Rights Foundation.
Pro Rights
Um,
Foundation.
yeah, Pro Rights Foundation. And Pro Rights Foundation has been working very closely with the working group for an ASEAN Human Rights Mechanism. Of course, to push for effective human rights system within the region. That is one. We have been also promoting, human rights education within the region, and uh, what we say we are doing the research-based advocacy. So,
Mm-hmm.
with colleagues in the region, I don't say in Thailand, with colleagues in the regions, we are working on a few research projects as part of what we call um, research-based advocacy. And I give you an example of a research project on religious freedom, human rights and
Mm-hmm.
religious freedom within ASEAN, um, reverse governance, because in ASEAN you have quite a number of countries, sharing international rivers. These are just some of the projects that I am um, running, with
Mm-hmm.
friends in Thailand and within the region. Thank you.
All right, so we'll take note of that, Dr. Sripapa, Pro Rights Foundation. And I am also hoping that your research based advocacy with your colleagues in Thailand and in the region are really working towards your vision also of having the AHRD being worked out and discussed within the ASEAN region among ASEAN peoples. So thank you for that, Dr. Sripapa. And on that note, we want to thank all our listeners and all our subscribers for joining us in this wonderful episode. Join us again next week and make sure that you subscribe to the podcast on Spotify so you never miss an episode. Also, subscribe to our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channel at WG ASEAN HR Mech and visit our website at ASEANHRMech.org. Again, this has been your host, Regine Jessica Abuel. Thank you all, and we hope that you got a lot of things from our episode here in ASEAN People Speak To. Good night, everyone, and have a great day. Bye!